As cartoons progressed in the early 2000s, my taste started to grow more mature. The offerings were getting more edgier as well. But there was one that resonated with me in a way no cartoons had done since. A series that had everything I wanted in a cartoon: humor, action, and swords. The anime series that I speak of is none other than Samurai Jack, a creation that came from the mind of Genndy Tartakovsky, the same man who created Dexter's Laboratory, which will get an installment of its own, would come off the heels of the original Star Wars: The Clone Wars, a collection of animated Star Wars shorts that premiered on Cartoon Network. When Samurai Jack aired in 2001, it would be at a time when Cartoon Network was at the height of its success. They had all of their cards on the table, but no one expected Samurai Jack to be what it had become. Nevertheless, it did. Accompanied by a premiere TV movie, it would become one of the top shows that came out of Cartoon Network studios. As for me, I fell in love with it instantly. What was not to love about it? A samurai on a mission to rid the world of evil in the future so he could return to the past to get rid of that same evil. As great as it was during its initial 4-season run, there was one episode that was not only my favorite, but also an episode that was forever seared into my brain. So, without further ado, my favorite episode of Samurai Jack is... So why is this particular episode my favorite? Well, let me reiterate once again. This is my favorite episode, but it's technically not the best episode of the series. There's a difference. I can name one in particular that stands out as technically the best episode of the entire series, and that would be the two-parter, The Birth of Evil, and episode 49, The 4 Seasons of Death. And to even say these were the best would be quite a stretch. There's a reason why Samurai Jack is held in high regard amongst fans of animation. It placed a huge emphasis on storytelling, crafty fan service disguised as influences, and an atmosphere that put it in a place where no anime series could match it at the time. Everybody who watched Samurai Jack wanted to see him to finally succeed in his mission. Episode 20 exemplifies that so much. First of all, the episode starts out with this fight scene with Jack disposing of Aku's minions. This is one of many things that this series always got right. Something most cartoons never really did. Set a mood. The scene has Jack in the rain, and there's lightning as he cuts through Aku's minions. It's so chaotic. Very reminiscent of a Chanbara flick. In case you don't know what a Chanbara flick is, let me enlighten you. These were films that were the equivalent of Western movies, but instead of cowboys, they usually took place in feudal Japan, Tokugawa era to be exact, and involved samurais. It would be a genre popularized by Akira Kurosawa and his frequent go-to actor Toshiro Mifune, with films such as Yojimbo, Sanjuro, and his mega epic Seven Samurai. Soon others would contribute to the genre, such as Shintaro Katsu with his Zatoichi film series, Tomisaburo Wakayama with the Lone Wolf and Cub movies. It may seem that I went off topic, but this isn't the case because Genndy went on record to say that these movies were the inspiration for the creation of Samurai Jack. It shows in this episode entirely, from the atmosphere to the score itself. Up to this point in the series, which would be the second season by the way, Jack was already facing off adversaries that tested his sanity and skill. It's a great open because you instantly identify that he has been locked in constant strife and the journey is breaking him down. You feel the frustration as Jack screams and throws his sword to the ground. Anyone that knows the history of samurai knows that their sword was their lifeblood. That's how painful his struggle was. That subtle indication always worked for me. Watching cartoons up to that point, you never seen the hero vulnerable like that.
It is impossible.
It was quite jarring, but in a great way. The only thing that was coming close to that was anime, but that's an entirely different thing altogether. Speaking of that, the point of contention has always been the animation style of Samurai Jack. It would be coined as the first cartoon to not use outlines for its character designs, and the backdrops were drawn as paintings. Back then, I felt it could have worked better if it was a slightly different art style. Now I understand why they went with it. Despite Jack being a samurai, the series never had him use his sword to cut anything beyond machines. Well, at least in the original Cartoon Network run. More on that later. The art style is used in a way that complements the action on screen, but at the same time, it never ever forgets that it is what it is, a cartoon. Anyway, Jack encounters 3 monks who are on a pilgrimage to climb a very tall mountain, and of course, Jack decides to accompany them. This brings me to another reason why I love this series and this episode. The lack of dialogue. Usually in a cartoon, especially around this time, cartoons were very dialogue heavy. Even in cartoons such as the DC and Marvel ones, characters always managed to spew some dialogue in between and during fight scenes. Here, when he meets the monks, the dialogue is straight to the point and sparse.
It appears very difficult. Yes.
One of the things that make this episode great is the score. Usually around this time, cartoons were usually scored standardly. But with Samurai Jack, it was quite different. In this episode, you hear these worldly rhythms. This floored me upon seeing it. I never heard anything like it before in any cartoon. It drives the point that Jack is about to go through some more hardship. And he sure does. He encounters goatmen and a rock monster as he climbs this mountain. But he ultimately encounters an abominable snowman that gives him his biggest challenge. Mind you, he's climbing it in a snowy blizzard. The thing that made this episode so special was that Jack is faced with an obstacle he can't seem to overcome. At every step, he wants to quit because he feels that it's impossible. This was very deep storytelling that you usually didn't see in Western animation. It was about a journey of a man who had grown weary and forgot what he was fighting for. It was an episode where you had to walk away from it feeling empowered. I did that day, seeing it for the very first time. It always stuck with me. If you decide to view the episode itself or have already seen it, you may speculate about the role of the monks by the end of the episode. Some may say that they were a figment of his imagination, something that he conjured up subconsciously to keep him going in his fight to rid of the world of evil. Or was he being led by the spirits of the mountain itself? The ending is what always made me remember this episode so fondly. The entire episode spoke to me personally, as I felt like Jack did in this episode. At one time, I had quit on myself because nothing wasn't going right for me, but it took others to snap me back into a place where I used to be. So I started to get back in shape, take my life back. This, in turn, led me to want to curate the animation experience and create this channel in the first place. Just like Jack, I had to climb that mountain, that obstacle to come out on the other side and become the person I am today. To this day, I never encountered any form of animation that resonated with me the way this episode did. It took him on a spiritual journey he had to go through to find his purpose again, and you felt you were with him the whole time. As for Samurai Jack himself, this would be only the beginning of what was to come. Let's just say that things from here on out became way more challenging for him. This brings me to the serious proverbial elephant in the room, that final season. In the context of this episode, I would say that this episode was the catalyst for that season entirely, but that's a whole different story itself. In all, Samurai Jack stands as one of the best pieces of Western animation ever made. I am glad to have gotten to experience it entirely in its first run. So the question I always ask myself these days, Is Cartoon Network still producing anything as great as this? Well,